Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read Aesop's Fables. So, let's get right on with it. Well, Aesop's Fables 2. The Escaped Jackdaw. A man caught a jackdaw and tied a piece of string to one of its legs, and then gave it to his children for a pet. But the jackdaw didn't at all like having to live with people, so after a while, when he seemed to have become fairly tame, and they didn't watch him so closely, he slipped away and flew back to his old haunts. Unfortunately, the string was still on his leg, and before long it got entangled in the branches of a tree, and the jackdaw couldn't get free, try as he would. He saw it was all up with him, and cried in despair, "Alas, in gaining my freedom, I have lost my life." The Farmer and the Fox. A farmer was greatly annoyed by a fox, which came prowling about his yard at night and carried off his fowls. So he set a trap for him and caught him, and in order to be revenged upon him, he tied a bunch of tow to his tail and set fire to it and let him go. As ill luck would have it, however, the fox made straight for the fields where the corn was standing ripe and ready for cutting. It quickly caught fire and was all burnt up, and the farmer lost all his harvest. Revenge is a two-edged sword. Venus and the Cat. A cat fell in love with a handsome young man, and begged the goddess Venus to change her into a woman. Venus was very gracious about it, and changed her at once into a beautiful maiden, whom the young man fell in love with at first sight, and shortly afterwards married. One day Venus thought she would like to see whether the cat had changed her habits as well as her form, so she let a mouse run loose in the room where they were. Forgetting everything, the young woman had no sooner seen the mouse than up she jumped, and after it like a shot, at which the goddess was so disgusted that she changed her back again into a cat. The Crow and the Swan. A crow was filled with envy on seeing the beautiful white plumage of a swan, and thought it was due to the water in which the swan constantly bathed and swam. So he left the neighbourhood of the altars, where he got his living by picking up bits of the meat offered in sacrifice, and went and lived among the pools and streams. But though he bathed and washed his feathers many times a day, he didn't make them any whiter, and at last died of hunger into the bargain. You may change your habits, but not your nature. The Stag with One Eye. A stag, blind of one eye, was grazing close to the seashore, and kept his sound eye turned towards the land, so as to be able to perceive the approach by the hounds, while the blind eye he turned towards the sea, never suspecting that any danger would threaten him from that quarter. As it fell out, however, some sailors coasting along the shore spied him and shot an arrow at him, by which he was mortally wounded. As he lay dying, he said to himself, "Wretch that I am, I bethought me of the dangers of the land, whence none assailed me, but I feared no peril from the sea, yet thence has come my ruin." Misfortune often assails us from an unexpected quarter. The Fly and the Draught Mule. A fly sat on one of the shafts of a cart, and said to the mule who was pulling it, "How slow you are! Do mend your pace, or I shall have to use my sting as a goad." The mule was not in the least disturbed. "Behind me in the cart," said he, "sits my master. He holds the reins, and flicks me with his whip, and him I obey. But I don't want any of your impertinence. I know when I may dawdle and when I may not." The Cock and the Jewel. A cock, scratching the ground for something to eat, turned up a jewel that had by chance been dropped there. "Ho," said he, "a fine thing you are, no doubt, and had your owner found you, great would his joy have been. But for me, give me a single grain of corn before all the jewels in the world." The Wolf and the Shepherd. A wolf hung about near a flock of sheep for a long time, but made no attempt to molest them. The shepherd at first kept a sharp eye on him, for he naturally thought he meant mischief. But as time went by and the wolf showed no inclination to meddle with the flock, he began to look upon him more as a protector than as an enemy. And when one day some errand took him to the city, he felt no uneasiness at leaving the wolf with the sheep. But as soon as his back was turned, the wolf attacked them and killed the greater number. When the shepherd returned and saw the havoc he had wrought, he cried, "It serves me right for trusting my flock to a wolf." The farmer and the stork. A farmer set some traps in a field, which he had lately sown with corn, in order to catch the cranes which came to pick up the seed. When he returned to look at his traps, he found several cranes caught, and among them a stork, which begged to be let go, and said, "You ought not to kill me. I am not a crane, but a stork, as you can easily see by my feathers, and I am the most honest and harmless of birds." But the farmer replied, "It's nothing to me what you are. I find you among these cranes who ruin my crops, and like them you shall suffer. If you choose bad companions, no one will believe that you are anything but bad yourself." The charger and the miller. A horse who had been used to carry his rider into battle felt himself growing old, and chose to work in a mill instead. He now no longer found himself stepping out proudly to the beating of the drums, but was compelled to slave away all day grinding the corn. Bewailing his hard lot, he said one day to the miller, "Ah me, I was once a splendid war-horse, gaily caparisoned, and attended by a groom, whose sole duty was to see to my wants. How different is my present condition! I wish I had never given up the battlefield for the mill." The miller replied with asperity, "It's no use your regretting the past. Fortune has many ups and downs. You must just take them as they come." The grasshopper and the owl. An owl who lived in a hollow tree was in the habit of feeding by night and sleeping by day. But her slumbers were greatly disturbed by the chirping of a grasshopper, who had taken up his abode in the branches. She begged him repeatedly to have some consideration for her comfort, but the grasshopper, if anything, only chirped the louder. At last the owl could stand it no longer, but determined to rid herself of the pest by means of a trick. Addressing herself to the grasshopper, she said in her pleasant manner, "As I cannot sleep for your song, which, believe me, is as sweet as the notes of Apollo's lyre, I have a mind to taste some nectar, which Minerva gave me the other day. Won't you come in and join me?" The grasshopper was flattered by the praise of his song, and his mouth, too, watered at the mention of the delicious drink. So he said he would be delighted. No sooner had he got inside the hollow where the owl was sitting, than she pounced upon him and ate him up. The grasshopper and the ants. One fine day in winter, some ants were busy drying their store of corn, which had got rather damp during a long spell of rain. Presently up came a grasshopper and begged them to spare her a few grains. "For," she said, "I'm simply starving." The ants stopped work for a moment, though this was against their principles. "May we ask," said they, "what you were doing with yourself all last summer? Why didn't you collect a store of food for the winter?" "The fact is," replied the grasshopper, "I was so busy singing that I hadn't the time." "If you spent the summer singing," replied the ants, "you can't do better than spend the winter dancing." And they chuckled and went on with their work. The farmer and the viper. One winter a farmer found a viper frozen and numb with cold, and out of pity picked it up and placed it in his bosom. The viper was no sooner revived by the warmth than it turned upon its benefactor and inflicted a fatal bite upon him. And as the poor man lay dying, he cried, "I have only got what I deserved for taking compassion on so villainous a creature. Kindness is thrown away upon the evil." And with that, we actually come to the end of the episode. So, I will say thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.